So I'm an academic. My background is in philosophy, but I took a turn in the 1990s when I became engaged with the philosophy and sociology of medicine. So, and that has been an interest of mine ever since. So in the 1990s, I started a PhD on Michel Foucault. And at that particular time, I still had a faith that to go to university or to study something in so much depth was about trying one's hardest to take on board a range of different ideas, to examine them with particular critical conceptual tools, and that this was a laudable thing to do, and that other academics were involved in the same pursuit. So it was in the 1990s that I got my first presentiment that something was not right, because I fell immediately between two stools. Radical feminists were part of this group for whom Foucault was the devil incarnate. And there was the other group who thought that if you weren't a Foucauldian, then you really were not very sophisticated. And this occurred, I mean, this was at Goldsmiths. I found myself trying to use a Foucauldian lens whilst also trying to use Foucault against himself, to criticize him at the same time, and it was impossible. This was the beginning of the realization that there was so much binary thinking within cultural studies, sociology, indeed in the human sciences in general, that it became impossible to make an argument without being categorized by one side or another side. And it was very disturbing, actually. And I ploughed my way through and got my PhD and so on. But it was something that and then I got a full-time tenured teaching position, and it's something that I slightly put on the shelf as very worrying, but managed to steer my way through. This came back with full force in 2014, 2015. In 2014-15, I was a research fellow at the University of Leicester in the Department of Medical Humanities. I happened to walk down the street and saw on the newsstand a picture of Bruce Jenner on Vanity Fair magazine, representing himself as a woman, and I wrote an article about it. There were think pieces at the University of Leicester, which were private think pieces, which academic on a forum which belonged to the university, or academics just shared articles with each other. I'd used a method of analyzing Bruce Jenner's performance in a very Butlerian, Judith Butler way, which is that gender identity is a performance, and he was classically performing it. When I wrote my article, quite innocently, something quite shocking happened to me. Nothing ever that I'd ever written in my life or said in my academic career had been problematic or caused a stir or threatened my livelihood or threatened to silence me completely. And that was that Tasha Kennedy, an academic from Goldsmiths, in fact, which in the 1990s was becoming a hotbed of queer theory. I was there whilst it was happening. So this person wrote to my university and said that my article was a breach of the 2010 Equality Act, that it was transphobic, bigoted, would make any trans member of staff or trans student feel unsafe, and suggested that the university might like to think about whether my position there was an appropriate one. So I, at that point, came to the attention of the Vice Chancellor. All my work was examined. My work was sent to the university lawyers. My work on the think pieces on the internal forum were taken down. And I had about possibly no more than 48 hours to contemplate whether I actually might get the sack, which was really scary. Remember that at this point, I had no other frame of reference. There were no other academics, to my knowledge, who had been threatened in this way. So it felt, and probably was actually, quite unique. All my work was reinstalled. I hadn't breached any the law in any way, and all seemed to go quite well. I felt supported by my university, actually, in the end. But the main point is that somebody, a random person, had the power to make a complaint about me, which he was sure would have an effect, and he was right. It did have an effect. For a brief period of time, the university, in relation to me, was threatened. I found that astonishing. Of course, then that put me on a course of thinking about such things, examining transactivism, examining the way that institutions were being captured. I learned a harsh, frightening lesson in 2016, which continued, and which it's just lessening now, I think. Since that time, there were numerous incidents. I began to do research into something which I saw was really problematic. And although my university was quite supportive on the one hand, I and Professor Michelle Moore and various other academics got together at the University of Leicester, where I still was, and we held a conference in secret. My head of department tolerated a meeting of us in secret, as long as it we didn't publicize it. So we started to form a research group, and then 2 books came out of that. The first one was called The Transgender Child, Born in Your Own Body. And after that, in first book, then a whole series of events happened. There were incidents beyond belief now. I was to give a special talk to medical students at King's College in London, and they refused to be taught by me. And after that, whenever there was a certain amount of interest in what I was saying from different groups at different universities. At the University of Bristol, I had to have security just to give a talk on my views. Students came in and disrupted the lecture, stood on the desk which was behind me. It took about an hour before the security people could get them out so that I could continue with my talk. This just became the modus operandi of how I was at that point. I was accused of, to the West Yorkshire Police, of and registered as having committed a non-crime hate incident by one of the talks that I gave. I was very frightened at one point when the second book was coming out that Michelle Moore and I wrote in and edited, when the Tavistock, when we received a letter from the Tavistock's lawyers insisting, absolutely insisting, that they had a legal right for the second book to be given to them prior to publication so that they could check whether we were saying anything defamatory or anything critical of the Tavistock, which of course we were. We were utterly critical. In fact, I hope this doesn't sound hubristic. It is a fact that Moore and I were the very first people to bring the Tavistock to public attention in the way that we did. And our publishers were very frightened by this letter and wanted to hand over a draft of the book to the Tavistock. They wanted to comply with the Tavistock's wishes because they were afraid. It was Cambridge Scholars Publishing, a small publishing house, and they were afraid that their business was going to be just, that it would have to end, because the Tavistock is a National Health Service institution, as we know, and if they had pursued their claim, they would have had lawyers available to them, which neither the publishing company nor Moore or myself had access to. We spent possibly 3 or 4 months in negotiation with Cambridge Scholars, trying to persuade them that the Tavistock was like, the fox in charge of the hen house. If we gave the book to them, that would be the end of the book. And so we not only entered into a battle with the Tavistock, we entered into a battle with Cambridge Scholars, who quite understandably were very afraid. But we managed to persuade them to hold their nose and dive in at the deep end. We managed to overcome our fear that we would have to sell our houses in order to pay for legal fees if it got worse. And of course, there was nothing that they could do about it, in fact. So everything was fine. And the point of this story is, it is astonishing that 2 academics in this country could be subjected to such threats, that a publishing company could be subjected to such threats. It was very disconcerting. It was very disturbing and frightening. I was frightened for myself, but I was frightened for the ways that the university was captured. And it was hardly creditable in a liberal democracy that this was possible. I look back at that time, which is not that long ago, and think that I was really quite naive about the kind of society in which I lived. The University of Leicester, which I retired from in 2017, as I've told you, were tacitly supportive. They didn't go for me. That's true. King's also didn't. I got an honorary position at King's after I retired. Again, King's was left me alone. They didn't, when the students refused to be taught by me, I thought I might lose my position, and I didn't. I didn't lose my position. What actually happened with my colleagues, both at Leicester and at King's, was that another shocking thing to me. I got lots of support from colleagues who wrote to me personally saying, "Good for you. I'm so pleased you're saying this. We don't dare say it." I then realized that academics were so fearful of saying what they thought. Not only were they fearful of saying what they thought, they often colluded and contributed to aligning themselves with certain positions which they didn't agree with. As an academic, where previously I had been aware that there was binary thinking going on, which was clearly against what I had understood being in academia was about, but which I hadn't seen as so pathological that one couldn't somehow get, negotiate it, having done a PhD, in fact, which negotiated different positions, to an understanding that this pathology around saying what one thinks connected with gender identity, ideology, was so embedded in society, in institutions, that it was eroding the premises of the fundamental premises of representative liberal democracy. The fact that I am being interviewed bodes extremely well. There was a moment in time at which I literally could not say what I've said to you without having been accused of being a right-wing bigot who has nothing but hate inside me. But I found myself now in another battle, which was totally it is astonishing to me. I find that I am now in another arena, which is so similar to the one that I've left. I am critical of Israel and understand Palestinians as being subject to a colonial occupation by Israel. And again, I can now write an article. It's an article about the silliness of the Women's Equality Party, and it will get numerous reads, retweets, and so on. I can write a very considered article about what is happening to the Palestinians, and I will be almost silenced by everybody who has held my back about the transgender identity issue. I don't have that feeling that everything is the order the social order, the academic order is righting itself. Where I felt a relief that the issue of free speech in a free society was becoming something that it was being recognized as being suppressed, and that there was something that we must do about it. We must alert society to this, that an authoritarianism was creeping into the government, to society, to institutions, to the media, is now being replicated. So that's just another way in which I think that unless we get a hold of, really keep a hold of the importance of free speech, even the speech of those with whom we disagree, unless we hold on to that very firmly and stop substituting Heather Brunskell-Evans as a transphobe to Heather Brunskell-Evans is an anti-Semite and is a hater of Jews, which is actually the accusation to me now. So where do I go from here? I think that, I'm just one person, one academic, for whom a morality tale could be, to whom a morality tale could be attached, that there is something larger than this going on.